Hello, dog fans, and welcome to DawgDial. I'm Josh Mendlinger, along with my host, Joel Taco Thompson, here to talk everything Georgia Bulldogs football with you today on DawgDial. We are broadcasting on a network of radio shows across Georgia and the Southeast, and on Facebook Live. And today we are live, as always, from Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia, on Highway 92. We'd like to thank our hosts here at Buffalo's for providing our location and some wonderful food here at Buffalo's Cafe. And we're going to talk everything about the Georgia Bulldogs.
Trip to Rocky Top.
Trip to Rocky Top and up into the orange and white country. And it was a orange and white out, I guess you could say, for the Volunteers. However, it was the Georgia Bulldogs who came up and showed their strength. And we'll get into that in our details today on DawgDial. Taco, what do you think about that game and how the Georgia Bulldogs showed up?
I think the skies went gray like Tennessee uniforms after the Dogs went up there. I think most people were a little bit Jones teams and the Tennessee teams have it ready for us. But we'll talk about the recap of the game, some key plays, maybe look at our midseason review, and talk about what's beyond the Tennessee Volunteers for the Dogs coming up.
You betcha. So stick with us on Facebook Live as well as on our podcast with the DawgDial. So we'll be right back. Go Dogs. Delays. Let's get back to it. We had a couple of delays on our setup here, but it happens. You know, we got to roll with that in Facebook. When you're going live, broadcasting on Facebook Live, you got to be able to deal with those kind of things, right, there, Taco?
Live TV.
Live TV, live Facebook. Yes,
you know,
and
make it look pretty on TV.
Well,
you get to do all that.
That's true. Well,
editing.
they also, they got other people, that are. We are self-sufficient here, but we are happy to be here at Buffalo's Cafe on Facebook Live. So hopefully we get a few folks to join us today here from our fans at Buffalo's Cafe. Hopefully we'll get a couple of good people to talk to, some visitors and some fan support and maybe a call-in or something
wings.
like that.
Sure
and we'll have to get some wings, that's for certain. So we're going to be going back onto our podcast and our broadcast in just a second. So Facebook Live friends, thanks for sticking with us and bearing with us. We are looking forward to a great discussion today about the Georgia Bulldogs. All right, welcome back, dog fans. We are here at Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia. I'm Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson, and we are going to get right to it. Taco, we're going to talk about the stomping that the Georgia Bulldogs did up in the mountaintop.
Stomp down and a meltdown. It was a good road trip for the Dogs. Tennessee after last year, I think you'd mentioned it earlier. The Hail Mary pass last year, this was nice for the Bulldogs to go up there in Knoxville territory, get a big victory in a impressive way. It was the first Bulldog shutout since, I think, 2014.
Right. For
the Dogs, and it was a first time Tennessee had been shut out in a while too. So
it was pretty good. In the last 6 meetings of the Volunteers and the Bulldogs, there was basically an 8-point differential, I think, total of all that, including the last second last night's game is tied. It's not quite tied up, but it's the Volunteers still have a slight edge in a 23-22-2 record against the Bulldogs. So the Bulldogs are looking to come back and get into the winning category, I guess you could say, get to 500 and then above and start dominating the Bulldogs want to dominate against the Volunteers.
Yeah,
over the next few years, huh?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at it here early on, Georgia jumped out in front early and just got ahead early. I mean, you got that first play from scrimmage, and the turnover, Georgia capitalized on that with just a field goal. But First two quarters, Georgia's was just dominant both on offense and defense. Again, Georgia, this was the 800th win all time for Georgia, I think in 120 seasons. But again, that balance of a good steady offense, a good steady running game. The passing, not so much, but enough of it mixed in there. But the Georgia defense again showed its teeth with a suffocating pounding of the quarterback, and also the running back Kelly from Tennessee was supposed to come in with some really good. Came in with really good numbers.
Yeah, you did, sure did.
And the Bulldogs shut him down.
Absolutely,
So,
as well as their quarterback.
Dormady.
Yep.
And
Dormady
shut that part of the attack down. So I think Kelly was coming to the game, I think even ahead of where Chubb is. But I think after that game, I think he had something like, I'll look at the statistics here
sure.
See how many.
Well,
he made 62 net rushing yards.
Sure thing. Well, he may have been ahead of Chubb in the rushing, but that's because he's probably the only guy that was getting the ball handed to him, whereas the four-headed monster, you could almost call it, for the Georgia Bulldogs backfield, certainly has been sharing the wealth, certainly has been, just spreading out the offense. And I think that's part of something we need to cover today is how well the Georgia Bulldogs are sharing and spreading out their weapons.
It's a good distribution. You're seeing the wide receiver core balance itself out. Wims had a couple of catches in there today. And, the other thing I would say in this game is that Tennessee did not help themselves. They certainly had four more turnovers, I think 4 turnovers in the game. That didn't help their cause. Their offense just couldn't get it going. The passing game, the rushing game, they were 11 for 23 with 2 interceptions in the passing game, 62 yards rushing, 2 yards per attempt. Again, that defense for Georgia just absolutely shut them down. So really, through the first half, you go into the halftime is at 20-0, and at halftime, if I'm a defensive player, I'm just looking, saying, hey, maybe we can pitch a shutout. Yeah, maybe we put a goose egg.
Yeah, there you go. That's the way to put it. And I think it was the defense, but also I think the special teams did step up as Blankenship continues his outstanding kicking.
He's
and
20 for 20
on
like putting it through the end zone. I think maybe they had one return back day.
I think they had one that they actually took out of the end zone, or even dared to take out of the end zone, you might say. But also, he was going, it was like 19 straight, like I said, 20 straight, that it was kickbacks. And if that's the way you're starting off, I think that's a good position to put your defense in.
5 for 5 on PATs. He kicked 2 field goals. He was 2 for 2 on field goals. He's only missed 1 this year. I think he's 85%. Field goal percentage, only having missed 1. So yeah, good special teams. I think we've been the red zone or the opposite of red zone in their deep territory a few times too. So special teams was a good.
Absolutely.
A good plus.
And then, special teams on the return team was excellent.
Better.
With number 4 Hardman putting a 27-yard return to put the Georgia Bulldogs into great field position. Then another one, the next kick, 18-yard return. Basically, the Bulldogs were putting themselves in the right places at the right times and taking advantage of, as you said earlier, the Volunteers just not really helping themselves.
Yeah, the Georgia Bulldogs out there on the field, when you're watching it, it just looked like the Georgia Bulldog athletes were just superior. And usually in the SEC, you see a lot of good athletic talent on the field. And any given day, Tennessee can compete. But, on this Saturday, it just looked like the Bulldogs were they came out ready. They came out running. Tennessee just couldn't get anything going. Maybe in the post-game press conference, Butch Jones just looked totally deflated.
Sure.
Didn't have an answer for the Bulldogs through and through, and maybe it's time for his seat to get a little bit hotter up there in Tennessee. That's the word.
Yeah, I could imagine it would be just that, getting pretty hot up in the mountaintop. So it's not just it's not just forest fires that can put the heat on you, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, the Georgia defense, come back to that again, led by Roquan Smith. He had like 10 tackles. We had a couple of INTs.
Right.
McGee had his first. We had a block punt as well, so you like to see some of those things in coming in towards midseason. And Georgia was awesome in the red zone.
Yes.
Georgia was 6 for 6. We're going to talk later in the show about our midseason form, but I think against Tennessee, when you get in that red zone, Georgia is able to punch that thing in there.
And I believe if you want to really get down to it, they've been, if I'm not mistaken, 100% in the red zone this year. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. We'll pull up some more of those fun stats and take a short break here at Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia, and come right back on Facebook Live and on our podcast, which you can catch if you'd like to at any time on the iTunes network. So we'll be right back on DawgDial. Stay with us.
And we can add the injuries and notes in here, too.
Okay. All right. We are back here on Facebook Live as well as on our podcast. So let's get this back on Facebook and come right back into our broadcast. All right, folks, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson here to talk everything Bulldogs football. We have talked about a few key, I could say a recap of the game. Obviously, we know that the Bulldogs came out strong and took the Volunteers by every part of them basically and whooped them good, as one might say, up in the mountains there. But you never know what the best terminology to use. So we're going to look to some of our Facebook fans to get some comments on what they think about the stomping that the Georgia Bulldogs did up in the mountains there in Tennessee. And feel free to send some feedback in and give us a post on Facebook at DawgDial. And you can just make a little comment in on our live broadcast if you'd like to hear your thoughts about the Georgia Bulldogs game in Tennessee. So, Taco, what we're going to get to now is, like some key performances and talk about some of those key players and individuals on the Georgia Bulldogs side. I think as far as standouts as a whole team, they shut down some of the standouts of the Volunteers we mentioned on offense, but also on the defensive side. Player number 39, Vickers, was shut down and the Bulldogs basically made all of their defense, but especially him, who they were looking to have a big game, they shut Vickers down and basically made him a non-issue, other than that early on, which had me a little worried, that early on hit that he delivered to to Fromm when he got past the lineman, and he put a licking on Fromm. And if Fromm has to deal with that, up until this point, he hasn't had to take a lot of hits, but he took a solid one from Vickers early in the game.
He did.
And survived, thankfully.
Yeah, I think, there's still a few little tweaks there in the offensive line, and, offensive line is much improved over last year. If you take us back last year, it's hard to make a quarterback comparison, which we'll get into here shortly. But as you mentioned, overall, it was the good balance. It was that Georgia defense, and I looked through the play chart. I don't know exactly how many 3-and-outs, but it sounds like this Georgia team may be one of their nicknames may be the 3-and-out defense. We'll see how that.
Well, we definitely know the first three.
Yeah, John Kelly was their star running back coming to the game. 16 of 46, 2.8 yards per carry. That's not going to get it done.
No.
The rest of their running backs, they're averaging 2 yards a carry versus Georgia. The quarterback, 5 of 16, and 64 yards. He had one good pass for 4 yards. So up and down the charts on the defense versus the Tennessee Vols offense. The Vols just didn't have anything in the tank.
Well, it took them 15 minutes into the game to even get a first down.
Yeah.
So they definitely were on the ropes.
And you don't want your first possession resulting in a pass, a turnover to the Georgia Dogs. Right. That will really put you on your heels. And, offensively, Georgia does what it does. It has a good, you mentioned distribution. There is good distribution amongst the running backs in the backfield. Chubb was 16 carries for 109 yards, 6.8 a carry. Sony Michel, 11 of 6 for 67.8 yards. Holyfield, 27 carries, 51 yards. Swift, 5 carries, 36 yards. You're looking at an average of 7 yards a carry by those 4 backs, but that's outstanding. Fromm, in his game orchestration, his first game where he had 2 running TDs. So I thought what he did was a pretty, if you look at the stats, he's 7 of 15, very pedestrian numbers. He had 1 TD. He was sacked twice, though, as you just brought up. So that's something we need to fix on the Georgia offensive line and maybe some schemes or maybe some switch-offs. But Fromm, again, managed that game, very adequately. But what I really like to see from Fromm, and Coach Smart talked about it in the postgame, is decision-making. So he pulled it down and ran for those 2 touchdowns. First time we've seen him do that.
Yes. Well, I think coaches, he learned during this game, too. If you watch that first possession that the Georgia Bulldogs had after the INT in the very first play of the game for the Vols, they came out with only a field goal, where that should have been a touchdown. If you missed that play early on, the dropped play to Nauta, or the bad pass. It was a bad decision. It was a bad throw made by Fromm. Because if you look at the replay, he had Sony Michel out of the backfield, wide open, going down the left side. Nobody was going to touch him. All he had to do was put a little fade pass, into the end zone area, and he was going to come down with that with nobody around him. So I think, as you were talking about just now, that he's learning, he's making those checkdowns, and I think because the game started that way, they had a coachable moment from him.
Freshman playing for 102,000. The fan base in Knoxville gets pretty rowdy, so another intimidating place to be. And unlike going to a place like Notre Dame, where you may fill the stands up with 30% Bulldogs, there's a lot of orange up there in Knoxville.
And it's blinding at times. You could even say, right? It's overwhelming. They had the checkerboard going in the stands. They had checkerboard on their clothing. However, I think Fromm was only seeing red.
Well, and we talked about going through other keys of the game. It was mistake free. So again, you're seeing a Georgia team that is staying within their the discipline, and not a whole lot of penalties, not a whole lot of mistakes. We got some special teams positives. You saw mistakes on the Tennessee side of the ball. You didn't see any in Georgia. So what are, coming into the midseason red zone efficiency? We talked about that earlier in this game. Not only in this game were they 6 for 6 in the red zone, 19 for 19 so far. You mentioned that off air. 19 for 19 on the season, and 14 of those are touchdowns.
Yes.
So that's pretty impressive.
That's efficient. That is the way things should be happening when you are looking to be the leader in the SEC East. Absolutely.
So as long as the culture's there, the Dogs are staying humble as they came into this game. We'll talk just a couple of injury notes. Reggie Carter went out in the first quarter and did not return. Trent Thompson went out and did not return. So for the most part, though, Dogs stayed healthy, stayed mistake-free. Good balanced attack between offense and defense so far in this game at Knoxville, a big away game, a game where they needed to come out and show what they had, and they did just that.
They did just that, and I think Kirby Smart has this team on offense and defense ready to go. And to your mention there about the injuries, next man up, two key guys go down, and boom. Didn't seem to be a blip of even worry for the Bulldogs defense. They just kept on motoring, kept on going. Next man stepped up, did well, did their job. And I think that's something in the past that the Bulldogs lacked. One key guy would go down, and there would be a hole. And it would be a hole for a while until, not even a game or two. It may have even been a season that we had a hole to fill. And now I think the Kirby Smart era has that next man up mentality fired up and ready to go and happening on all cylinders.
Yeah, I think most importantly when you play high-level football in the SEC, the too deep has to be really too deep. So, and I think Georgia, as you see it, is building that bench. And it all starts with recruiting, which that's a whole other show in and of itself. But can't you imagine the impact of a game for recruits in Knoxville thinking about going to Tennessee? Most likely he's looking around saying, well, maybe that Georgia team's not so bad. So, it does help to be ahead in these games early in the season because guess what? Your too deep starts to get real playing time. And there wasn't a drop-off. I mean, if you look at the participation chart in this game, Georgia got a lot of players in this game. So that builds on experience. That builds for next year. It gets some real game time experience in a hostile atmosphere. I think that's a positive, too.
That is it. And the coaches are not worried that if they need to give a breather to a player or two, that the next guy the guy can cause a problem or be a problem, or that the other team, the offense, will be able to exploit that player coming off the bench.
Yep.
And it's that it's that Alabama mentality that Kirby Smart has brought over to the Dog Nation.
Yeah, depth is always going to help you, and of course we're dealing with a very spotlight position at the quarterback position. We're playing a true freshman. We had an experienced quarterback come back from last year, injured in the very first game. The quarterback position is so far this year has not been a make or break for the Bulldogs, but guess what? The quarterback still is the leader of that offense, and still we were playing with a true freshman at quarterback, and he's steadied the boat. He's gotten the belief of his teammates, and when you talk about depth, that's going to be real helpful to Georgia, especially the later in the season that you get.
All right. And to be fair to Eason a little bit, the weapons this year seem to be a little more sure-handed than they were last year.
Couple of drops here and there,
so
but
that
yeah,
definitely helps. That helps Fromm as well, as we talk about. We'll come back in the next segment. We talk about players like number 6 Wims, who had some great receptions himself. Someone that I really hadn't thought about a whole lot, but we can talk about him and give him a couple of mentions when we get back here on DawgDial. So we're going to take a quick break. Stick with us on Facebook Live. We are here in Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock. So stick with us, Dog fans. We'll be right back. Go Dogs.
grades.
Yes.
How about that?
You betcha. All right. Welcome back to DawgDial on Facebook and on our podcast on the CRM Sports Network. We are broadcasting here from Buffalo's Cafe, as we've mentioned. A great place to come out and bring your family.
Bash night.
Bash night, yes.
Bash
Don't
nights.
miss all-you-can-eat wing
Monday,
nights.
Wednesday,
Monday,
all-you-can-eat
Wednesdays, all you can
wings.
eat. Bring them down, and kids eat free on Sundays, I believe it is, right?
Yes, sir.
And $2 margaritas even, frozen margaritas. So come on out. But we're here to talk Bulldog football, Georgia Bulldogs football, that is, as we have to just, midway through the season now, Taco. And I think we need to give a little mid-season progress report.
Yeah, I
What do you
figure
think?
we could do a mid-season primer. You've got a good nucleus of after 5 games, a mix of playing one FCS team,
Yeah.
2 SEC teams, an out-of-conference game, and away game at Notre Dame, which is big. So far, 5-0. Then people start looking ahead down to the next schedule. We've got Vanderbilt, Missouri, Florida, South Carolina, Auburn, Kentucky, Georgia Tech coming up to finish out the slate. But let's talk about how we are mid-season. We've talked about, I think, what some of the key strengths and weaknesses are. But let's go down through and let's grade position by position.
I think that's the way to go. I think we need to start off. Let's start off with what do you say? Let's just start off with special teams. I say. How about we start there, because that's the first part of the game.
Special teams is a solid A- for us, and the only reason I give it an A- is because we missed one field goal. Other than that, and our punting, probably the punting average, and we really haven't had any returns for points off of special teams. So that was the only reason I'd give it a minus. Otherwise, I think Georgia's solid A. I think we got a good field goal kicker on, and that
Keeps
run
away.
backs,
Absolutely.
prevents possibilities for points being scored.
Right.
So
we don't want those big guys to come off the bench and light us up.
Yep.
What about our kick? Speaking of big play guys, I mean, Georgia Bulldogs has returners that are showing up.
Yeah, the return game is, again, okay. I think this game was the first game where we had some decent punt returns. Mm-hmm. You know, the kickoff is designed nowadays in today's game where it's normally a touchback, but on your punt return team is where you can expect to open it up a little bit. I think we did that against Tennessee. Again, you can see some of the athletes. Hardeman was our predominant. He's our predominant punter, and he had a couple of nice returns this
he did Hardwick, yes.
This game.
He did. And, you know, what's nice is that in the past couple of years, we've been using our key running backs as our punt returners. Mm-hmm. So having some sure hands, and I don't want to jinx, let's knock on some of this Buffalo's Cafe wood in the background here. I don't want to jinx us on special teams, but, you know, that's a good thing that we're not using those key guys to keep them off the field where they can get hurt even more during those special teams. Guys are coming down full steam trying to make a point. So It's nice that we have some people stepping there. So let's, on that note, let's turn to the offense.
Offensively, I think offensive line I'm going to give a B+ to. I think there's still some gelling to do there. I think we had a couple of sacks in this game this past Saturday. In previous games, there's been a few missed assignments. We have one injury, and we had a replacement come in who did a pretty good job. Deshaun Sims came in right guard to replace Reggie Carter. Mm-hmm. And, again, talking about the two deep, the offensive line, a solid B+. Our wide receivers, I would put them in a B+ category as well. Our passing game is pedestrian, so it really hasn't been tested. We don't have that Julio Jones-type receiver yet, but we have some solid catches, some solid passing.
Well, like we talked about 6 wins, he had that couple of first down catches when we needed it. We were down deep. It was like third and long, and he came up and stepped up, got himself open, had a couple of good sure-handed catches.
Godwin and Wims both carrying the load there. Still, the tight ends, we throw those in there. Again, a B+. I think it's solid blocking from tight end. We have utilized tight end as a receiving game, so I got to running backs to go to running backs. Obviously, with Georgia, you have to go A. We've got a stable of 4. You've got Chubb and Michelle carrying the majority of the load.
4A. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, each of the big 4 that have been touching the ball have been pretty solid with it.
Yeah, DeAndre Swift and Holyfield. Harrion is also those 3. Mm-hmm. You know, those 3 players behind the power of Chubb and Michelle. So you're seeing 5 backs touching the ball,
even 5,
and spreading out around really good. So I would definitely put us in the solid A category at the running back position. Quarterback, I would bounce that around and tell you that the quarterback position I'm going to do a B-.
Okay.
And the reason why is, you know, Fromm is a freshman. He's got 60% of his passes, not throwing INTs, not making bad decisions. But if you look around the league at the highest levels, there are probably better performances by quarterbacks in SEC play. What Georgia has not had to do yet is to rely and put the team's efforts or wins, losses on the shoulders of the quarterback. You've got a balanced running attack, a good offensive line. So, you know, right now, if you had to put a question mark on the Georgia Bulldogs and where they are, or a grade below the A category, I think you have to look at the quarterback position.
I can't argue with you on that. I know a lot of people are thinking that, obviously, because of the success, it is all quarterback, and that's typically the way things happen in the football world. All the prestige, all the notoriety when you're winning goes to the quarterback. Of course, on the flip side, when you start losing, the quarterback is the first guy they go to blame.
Yep.
And that's true with the NCAA. That's true with NFL at all levels of football, even down to high school. So
Yep.
It's something that we can work on. We don't want to give them that high a grade. I can agree with you. You don't want to give them that high grade because there is work to be done and learn to be done by Fromm. And, as evident, we talked about.
We'll talk about Fromm and Eason in the next segment. Let's get a little bit more in detail. People probably want to hear about that.
That's got a good segment to focus on.
And shifting to the defense, let's just go ahead and give the grades. D-line, linebackers, defensive backs. I don't think you can give anybody less than an A on the defensive side
as of right now, I agree. Their midterm progress report would be an A. They're causing turnovers. They're causing 3-and-outs. And just making things happen for the defense. But they're also keeping the offense off the field at the right times. And I think it also helps the defense is doing well because they're off the field at the right time because our offense is not turning the ball over. And I think that balance has helped both sides of the ball there.
8 tackles for loss on Saturday by the Bulldogs. And so you're seeing the defensive line in the backfield. We had 2 sacks on the quarterback Saturday. In the season through and through, what you're not seeing is some of those boneheaded plays by the defensive backs where they're, the receivers are getting behind them, or a trick play, or a blown coverage.
Right.
You're just not seeing that from the Georgia Bulldogs like you're used to seeing it. So I've got to give some credit to Mel Tucker and his defense. Got to give them an A.
I'll agree with you on that. And I tell you what, when we come back, we're going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this quarterback. I won't even call it an issue. Quarterback
discussion.
How
about that?
Let's not yet, because it's not truly a dilemma. It's not a problem. It's not a controversy. I would say it's just a discussion because it's a good problem they're going to have
discussing.
to look at. You bet. So we'll be right back on DawgDial. Stick with us. We'll be right back to talk Fromm and Eason. Go Dogs.